the brutal execution of Hugh Despenser. What they did to him was beyond inhuman in the blood-soaked courtyards of medieval England, where political betrayal and royal vengeance transformed public executions into elaborate theaters of cruelty that pushed the boundaries of human suffering beyond all recognition. There occurred one of history's most horrific and methodically brutal executions, the systematic torture and death of Hugh Despenser the Younger, a man whose rise to power as the favorite of King Edward II and subsequent fall from grace would culminate in a public spectacle of revenge so extreme and inhuman that it shocked even the violence-hardened medieval world and established a new standard for political cruelty that would haunt English history for generations. This is the investigation into how personal hatred, political revenge, and medieval concepts of justice combined to create an execution so elaborately cruel and systematically torturous that contemporary chroniclers struggled to find adequate words to describe the horrors inflicted upon a man who had become the most hated figure in England, leading to his destruction through methods that were designed not merely to kill, but to inflict the maximum possible suffering while sending an unmistakable message about the consequences of political betrayal and royal favoritism. Today, we explore the contemporary chronicles, court records, and eyewitness accounts that document this extraordinary display of medieval cruelty, revealing how the execution of Hugh Despenser became a defining moment in English political history that demonstrated the terrifying extremes to which political revenge could be taken when unconstrained by mercy, law, or basic human decency. Our investigation begins with Hugh Despenser's rise to power in the early 1320s, when his intimate relationship with King Edward II granted him unprecedented influence over royal policy, vast wealth through confiscated lands, and political authority that made him effectively the ruler of England behind the weak and ineffectual king who seemed incapable of governing without his favorite's guidance and support. Contemporary chronicles describe how Despenser used his position as the king's closest advisor and probable lover to accumulate enormous personal wealth through the seizure of noble estates, manipulation of royal justice, and systematic corruption that made him fabulously rich while creating an ever-growing list of powerful enemies who plotted his destruction with increasing desperation and fury. The historical records reveal how Despenser's arrogance and cruelty toward other nobles, combined with his apparent control over the king's decisions, created a political crisis that threatened the stability of the English monarchy and led to the formation of a coalition of barons determined to remove him from power by any means necessary. Medieval court documents show how Despenser's enemies, led by Queen Isabella and her lover Roger Mortimer, gradually built a case against him that included charges of treason, corruption, murder, and various other crimes that provided legal justification for the extreme punishment they planned to inflict upon their fallen enemy. The political situation reached its climax in 1326 when Queen Isabella returned from France with a military force and rapidly gained support from English nobles who were eager to overthrow the regime that had enriched Despenser at their expense, leading to the quick collapse of Edward II's government and the capture of both the king and his favorite. Contemporary accounts describe how Despenser was dragged from his hiding place and immediately subjected to preliminary tortures designed to weaken his body and spirit before the main execution, including forced starvation, beating, and various forms of physical abuse that left him barely alive before the formal proceedings began. The execution itself took place on November 24, 1326, in the town square of Hereford, where a massive crowd gathered to witness what would become one of the most elaborately cruel public executions in medieval history, with every aspect of the punishment carefully designed to maximize suffering while providing spectacle for the bloodthirsty audience. Medieval chronicles describe how the execution began with Despenser being dragged through the streets while tied to horses, a process that left his body battered and bloody before he even reached the scaffold, where the main tortures would be administered by executioners who had been specifically instructed to prolong his suffering as much as possible. The formal execution followed the traditional pattern for traitors, beginning with hanging that was carefully controlled to avoid killing the victim, instead leaving him partially strangled and gasping for breath while remaining conscious for the more elaborate tortures that would follow in accordance with the medieval legal formula for punishing treason. Contemporary eyewitness accounts describe how Despenser was then subjected to disembowelment while still alive and conscious, with his intestines removed and burned before his eyes in a process designed to cause maximum pain while ensuring that he remained aware of his suffering until the very final moments of his ordeal. The execution continued with castration, a punishment that reflected medieval beliefs about the relationship between sexual corruption and political treason, with Despenser's genitals removed and burned as part of the systematic destruction of his body that was intended to mirror the systematic destruction he had inflicted upon the English political system. Medieval legal records reveal how the executioners had been specifically instructed to ensure that Despenser remained conscious throughout the entire process, using techniques developed through generations of experience in conducting public executions that would maximize both the victim's suffering and the crowd's satisfaction with the spectacle of justice being served. The final stage of the execution involved the traditional quartering of the body, with Despenser's limbs severed and his torso divided into pieces that would be distributed to various locations throughout England as a warning to anyone who might consider similar crimes against the established political order. Contemporary chronicles describe how Despenser's head was mounted on London Bridge alongside other traitors, while pieces of his body were sent to major cities throughout the kingdom to serve as permanent reminders of the fate that awaited those who betrayed their sovereign lords and corrupted the proper functioning of royal government. The extreme nature of Despenser's execution reflected not only the personal hatred of his enemies, but also medieval legal theories about the appropriate punishment for treason, which was considered the most serious possible crime because it threatened the fundamental order of society and therefore demanded the most severe possible response. Historical analysis reveals how the brutal execution of Hugh Despenser served multiple political purposes, including satisfying the desire for revenge among the nobles he had wronged, demonstrating the new regime's commitment to justice, and establishing clear boundaries for acceptable political behavior through the most extreme possible example of consequences. The contemporary reaction to Despenser's execution was mixed, with some chroniclers expressing satisfaction that justice had been served while others were horrified by the extreme cruelty displayed in the punishment, suggesting that even medieval society recognized that the execution had crossed normal boundaries of acceptable violence. Modern historical analysis has revealed how Despenser's execution became a template for later political executions in England, with elements of his punishment being repeated in the deaths of other high-profile traitors who were subjected to similarly elaborate and cruel execution procedures designed to maximize both suffering and public spectacle. The long-term impact of Despenser's execution on English political culture included the establishment of precedents for extreme punishment of royal favorites who abused their positions, creating expectations that future political crises would be resolved through similarly violent means that would continue to characterize English politics for centuries. Archaeological investigations at execution sites have revealed evidence of the elaborate preparations required for such complex executions, including specialized tools, staging areas, and disposal methods that demonstrate the systematic and premeditated nature of these exercises in public cruelty and political messaging. The psychological impact of witnessing such extreme executions on medieval populations remains a subject of scholarly debate, with historians attempting to understand how regular exposure to elaborate public cruelty affected social development and individual psychological health in communities where such spectacles were considered normal entertainment. As we examine the chronicles, legal records, and contemporary accounts that document the horrific execution of Hugh Despenser, we discover how medieval concepts of justice, political revenge, and public spectacle combined to create punishments that exceeded even the brutal standards of their time, revealing the terrifying extremes to which human cruelty could be taken when political hatred was allowed to operate without restraint, creating spectacles of suffering that served as both entertainment and warning, while demonstrating the medieval world's capacity for systematic torture that makes even modern sensibilities recoil from the elaborate cruelty that political enemies could inflict upon each other when driven by hatred, fear, and the desire for absolute revenge.